Welcome to Global Pulse, and thank you for joining us for the deep dive. Today we're cutting through the noise on, well, a truly monumental story.
There really is.
A sudden and very significant twist in global trade. We are unpacking President Trump's announcement of a massive, immediate 25% tariff aimed squarely at any country that continues to do business with Iran.
And this is so much more than just a headline. It's an urgent look at how geopolitics is reshaping global commerce, like right now, in real time. Our mission today is to really synthesize the foreign policy context behind this new Iran tariff and place it within the much larger and, frankly, far more contentious framework of the entire 2025-2026 U.S. trade strategy. We have sources detailing everything from the immediate reactions to the dizzying scope of all these other tariffs.
And there's a huge legal challenge hanging over all of it.
A huge one, including a major Supreme Court test. This announcement is just the tip of a very, very complex iceberg.
Okay, so let's unpack that immediate spark then. This 25% measure, it's effective immediately, and it's a direct response to the brutal crackdown on anti-government protests that are just rocking Iran right now.
It is. The administration is essentially leveraging trade to intervene in what it sees as a human rights crisis.
And the sources are really clear that the situation on the ground in Iran has escalated dramatically.
Oh, absolutely. We're talking about protests that, they started out focused on economic hardships, but they've morphed into these outright defiant calls for the collapse of the clerical establishment.
And the response from Tehran has been just devastatingly swift. We're seeing mass arrests, aggressive internet blackouts.
Designed to stop information from getting out.
Exactly. And some truly horrifying reported death tolls. One human rights group cited in our sources put the number at least 2,000 people.
2,000. It's a very serious crisis. And the administration's response is to escalate economic pressure far beyond what we've seen before.
So how does this new tariff actually work?
Well, the core announcement, which came through Truth Social, dictated, and I'm quoting here, that any country doing business with the Islamic Republic of Iran will pay a tariff of 25% on any and all business being done with the United States of America.
Any and all business. That's the key phrase, isn't it? Because previously, U.S. sanctions usually targeted specific companies or transactions using the U.S. dollar.
Precisely. This is different. This applies a flat 25% tariff on the entire country's trade with the U.S. if they keep their trade ties with Tehran. It turns secondary sanctions into these comprehensive national trade penalties.
It forces a choice.
It forces nations to choose, trade with the U.S. or trade with Iran.
And that immediately puts some major global players in a really impossible position. Let's look at their reactions, because this is where the shockwave really begins.
We have to start with China. I mean, they're Iran's largest trading partner by a huge margin. In 2024, I think the data shows they were buying something like 77% of Iran's oil exports.
Wow, so they are the immediate target here.
The primary target. And they pushed back hard. A spokesperson for the Chinese embassy didn't pull any punches, threatening retaliation, stating Beijing would take all necessary measures to safeguard its legitimate rights and interests.
That was a direct warning.
A very direct warning, saying flat out that tariff wars and trade wars have no winners and coercion and pressure cannot solve problems.
They see it as economic coercion, not just a tariff.
Exactly. But it's not just China feeling the heat. You have to consider India. They're also a major trade partner, and they have the strategic Chabahar port project, which is vital for them.
Right, for access to Central Asia.
And that now faces serious indirect risks. Even if the project itself gets an exemption, the broader trade relationship is under pressure. And this is on top of existing U.S. penalties.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. India is already facing a steep 50% tariff for buying Russian oil.
Exactly. So you stack this new Iran penalty on top, and it just further compromises vital Indian exports to the U.S. market. Things like rice, tea, pharmaceuticals. The pressure is cumulative.
We even saw concern from the Gulf states, right?
We did. The UAE's Minister of Foreign Trade specifically flagged that this tariff will affect commodity supplies, especially food products, because Iran is a major provider for them.
So this shows just how quickly these foreign policy decisions can impact, consumer prices and food stability in neighboring countries.
It's the definition of collateral damage, and it highlights why this Iran tariff cannot be viewed in isolation. It's just the newest, sharpest edge of a trade strategy that's been building since 2025.
And that's the critical context for you, the listener. This new tariff is dropping onto a foundation that has already been completely overhauled, driven by an administration that believes, as our sources state, that tariff is the most beautiful word in the dictionary.
This whole strategy really has two major components we need to break down: the sweeping reciprocal tariffs and then the more targeted product-specific ones.
Okay, let's start with the reciprocal tariffs. These were announced back in April 2025 under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA.
Yes, and that IEPA authority is critical because it's the centerpiece of the legal challenge we'll get to later.
So what's the baseline for these?
The baseline is a 10% tariff on imports from most nations, but the system uses trade deficits as the main trigger to escalate those duties. So 10% is just the start.
And those escalations are severe. I mean, we're seeing current rates that feel punitive. India and Brazil are both at 50%.
50%. Syria's at 41%, Laos at 40%. And for China, they're facing cumulative rates as high as 45% on most goods just from stacking these IEPA duties on top of previous tariffs.
Okay, you just used a keyword there, stacking. It's often glossed over, but it's really the engine that drives these incredibly high rates. Can you break down what that actually means for, say, an importer?
I can. And it's so important to understand this. The rules are explicitly designed to allow stacking. So imagine a shipment of steel coming from China. It might already face, let's say, a 15% standard duty and maybe a 10% anti-dumping duty. Under the new framework, you then stack the IEPA reciprocal tariff on top of that, which is already high for China, plus the new product-specific tariff.
So you're adding them all up.
You're adding them all up. If you have a 15% duty plus 10% plus 45% from IEPA and then a 50% steel tariff, the total duty rate is well over 100%.
Which essentially just bars that product from the U.S. market.
It makes it completely uncompetitive. That's the goal.
Now, circling back to those IEPA reciprocal tariffs, the list of nations that are exempt is, well, it's politically fascinating. Only 6 are exempt.
That's right. 4 of them are who you'd expect: Russia, Belarus, Cuba, and North Korea.
Right, because existing sanctions are already so restricted, there's barely any trade anyway.
Exactly. Reciprocal tariffs would be meaningless. But the other 2 are Canada and Mexico.
Our closest trade partners under the USMCA. This is where I have to pause. Why group our 2 biggest allies in the same exemption category as 4 hostile nations? What message does that send?
It sends a very mixed message, to say the least. It kind of suggests that while the USMCA exemption is real, their trade relationship is still being viewed through the same nationalistic lens, but we have to stress they're only exempt from the reciprocal tariffs.
Which brings us to the second category, the targeted, product-specific Section 232 tariffs. And these are usually justified based on national security.
And these rates are astronomical. For aluminum and steel, the duties were hiked to 50% for almost everyone.
I think the UK got a partial exemption.
They did. They taste 25%, but most of the world faces that full 50% rate.
And then we saw a 25% tariff on all imports of autos and auto parts. And most recently, just this month, a new 25% tariff on high-end semiconductors and AI chips.
Right, specifically targeting advanced products like the NVIDIA H200 and the AMD MI325X. The intention is pretty clear: target strategic industries and force supply chains to move or just shut down entirely.
So connecting this massive, complicated web of tariffs, the IEPA baseline, the Section 232 duties, the stacking, and now the new Iran penalty to the bigger picture, what does it all cost?
This is where we need to bring it down to a human level. For you, the U.S. household. Detailed economic modeling shows these tariffs translate directly into a measurable tax increase on consumers.
And what's the number?
The average tax increase, or cost, is estimated to be about $1,100 per U.S. household in 2025, rising steeply to $1,500 in 2026.
$1,500. That is not an abstract number. I mean, that's an extra munch of groceries for a family or a significant car payment.
It is, and the macro impact is just as stark. Modeling suggests this combination of tariffs will reduce long-run U.S. GDP by 0.7% overall.
And what about jobs?
Even more concerning, these policies are estimated to eliminate about 503,000 full-time equivalent jobs. That's 500,000 jobs lost, and that's before we even fully factor in foreign retaliation.
And retaliation is already happening. It's impacting U.S. exports, estimated to affect something like $223 billion worth of trade.
Which hits specific American sectors very hard. Agriculture is a prime example.
But despite all this, one of the most interesting strategic pivots has come from China. They've somehow managed to maintain a record trade surplus.
They have.
That seems completely counterintuitive. How are they pulling that off?
They executed this massive and very successful redirection of their export engine. Instead of relying so heavily on the U.S. consumer market, they have aggressively pivoted their manufacturers to other growing global markets,
Where are they going?
primarily Southeast Asia, Africa, and Latin America.
So the U.S. tariffs have changed the flow of trade, but they haven't crippled China's manufacturing engine. They've just made U.S. consumers pay more while China finds new customers.
That's certainly one way to look at it. The tariffs have created friction, no doubt, but China's resilience highlights a major difficulty in using these tools. Global trade is more adaptable than policymakers perhaps anticipated.
And all of it, brings us to the central vulnerability of the entire strategy, the legal crisis. The Supreme Court is currently reviewing the legality of these core tariffs.
This is the sword of Damocles hanging over the whole structure. The legal challenge questions whether the president even has the authority under IEPA, that International Emergency Economic Powers Act, to impose these tariffs in the first place.
So what's the argument here? Why are the lower courts saying this isn't allowed?
Well, IEPA was enacted in 1977, and it's designed to let the president regulate commerce during declared national emergencies, usually to control things like financial transactions with hostile states.
Not for setting long-term trade policy.
Exactly. The lower courts have already ruled that using IEPA to impose broad, long-term duties on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of goods exceeds that emergency authority. They argue it's not meant to replace Congress's power to set tariffs.
But those rulings were stayed, so the tariffs are still in effect while we wait.
They are. Oral arguments were in November, but as of today, January 14th, 2026, still no ruling. So this entire costly system, the $1,500 household cost, the $500,000 lost jobs, is all operating under a massive legal cloud.
And the stakes are astronomical. President Trump himself issued a stark warning about what happens if the Supreme Court rules against them.
He warned, and I'm quoting again, that it would be a complete mess and almost impossible for our country to pay.
What does he mean by that?
He means that if the court rules against them, it could invalidate the entire reciprocal tariff structure. That could force the government to issue hundreds of billions of dollars in refunds to every importer who's paid those duties for the last 2 years.
The financial chaos would be unimaginable.
Profound.
So let's pull all these threads together. We started with this new targeted 25% tariff on Iran's trade partners as an urgent foreign policy move. But we've established this is just the newest layer on a huge, complex structure of existing tariffs.
A complex web that carries a massive, measurable cost for you, the U.S. household, and the entire economy. And the whole system, from the baseline 10% duty to the 50% steel tariff, all hangs on a legal decision that could invalidate its central mechanism overnight.
So ultimately, here's a provocative thought for you to consider. This immense domestic economic disruption, that $1,500 average cost per U.S. household, the 500,000 jobs lost, that is the measurable price being paid by the American public to achieve foreign policy goals, like pressuring the Iranian regime. What value do you place on that exchange, especially when the legal basis for the whole thing is still so uncertain?
The trade world has, I think, permanently shifted. It's moved from a focus on efficiency and free markets to being explicitly leveraged for national security and geopolitical advantage. That's the new and very costly global reality.
We hope this deep dive on Global Pulse is giving you a clear, concise view of the recent tariff news and the bigger picture. We love hearing from you, so please let us know what topic you'd like us to tackle in our next deep dive by commenting below. If you enjoyed this analysis, please remember to like and comment. Thank you for listening.